Scholars, welcome to Chapter 7. Today we're going to talk about the people in your at least virtual neighborhood. We're going to talk about collaboration online, and we're going to talk about this in the context of groups. Now, admittedly, the focus here is going to be about groups, but you're going to hear us often slide into organizations, because even though groups and organizations are technically different things, the way that they function, the way that they interact, especially online, tends to be very parallel. And so a lot of the things we'll talk about with groups will also work in organizational contexts as well. So let's get into it. Let's talk about how we work with others. I think these days, almost sort of more than we've ever thought possible, working with others online is really common. The COVID-19 pandemic forced a lot of us to work online, some of us for the first time. And since that, we sort of haven't looked back. We see increasingly numbers of virtual learning, virtual work, people that stopped working face-to-face during the pandemic that just never went back and continue to work remotely or work from home. And so I think online collaboration is much, much more common today than even 5 or 10 years ago. And yet there's still a lot of questions about how do we do this functionally? How do we collaborate with others and work with others in an effective way when we're doing this online? One of the ways we do this is we need to start seeing others as group members rather than individuals. Now, this is not to say we completely disregard their individuality, but rather we need to recognize the people that we're working with and collaborating with as like ourselves, as members of this group, rather than just a sort of fractured association of 5 completely different people with nothing in common. Now, this may seem easy, and yet a lot of the tools that we have online these days actually make this really complicated. Think of a lot of social media profiles that you see where they look like this. And so we see this profile of Josie Dental. I assume that her last name is not Dental, but maybe she appears to be a dental student. Or, man, did she pick the right career? Now, at first blush, this profile seems really individuating. This seems like it would really tell you who Josie is. And yet, as you look closely, you start to see there's actually a lot of social categories, a lot of social groups put forth. Again, even in the profile, Josie Dental, I'm assuming that's not her actual name, since her profile reads New Grad Dentists. She's a dentist. This is a large part of at least her online presence. She's identifying herself as a social category of dentist. Just look at that fantastic smile. So things like finance and lifestyle and dentistry, she's telling you the types of social categories that she puts herself into. And it gives us a way to start to identify her. First of all, to identify her as a unique individual. This helps us between the profile photo and the interest distinguish this Josie from other Josies on Instagram. But more critically, into our point, it also helps us understand who Josie is through different social categories to which she identifies. Josie's a dentist, she's interested in lifestyle stuff, she's interested in finance. This starts to give us either some stereotypes or social categories to put her in to understand her. One of the great challenges online then is, when do the social cues in a profile like this or an email address guide seeing the person it's representing as a group member rather than an individual? One of the things that can really tip us off to this is the cues and the intensity of those cues. So again, we've got a great smile. Her name and the profile user handle is Dental. Talks about being a dental student, dental weekly tips, dentistry. She's kind of really hammering us over the head here with this dentistry identity and putting yourselves into those categories and showing those categories. Alternately, if you find yourself interested in dental hygiene, you may sort of lean towards understanding her more as a social category rather than an individual, because also sharing that social categorization of someone interested in good teeth, that makes sense to you, and it's a way to reduce uncertainty and interact with her. So some of the cues that we get to a person can cue us up to whether it's a personal identity or a social category. The other thing that really does this is the context of interaction. If you had just met Josie on the street and this was someone you were interested in being friends with or dating, and you look at this, a lot of the cues you're getting tend to be very individuating. Oh, is this someone I would like to spend time with? Not, is this a social category member that I want to spend, a social member of a social category with whom I want to spend time. Alternately, if you were looking for a study buddy in your dental class and you were scrolling through profiles of people in your class and you ran across this one, now all of a sudden Josie seems great, not necessarily because she's Josie the unique person, but because, man, she really seems to have strongly identified with this dental student, dentist identity, and that probably makes a really good study buddy. And so the context of interaction can also help as well. For a lot of online groups, for organizations, and the formal groups that we associate with, by virtue of us getting put into this online work group because of our offline group or our organizational membership, that already sort of cues us up to look into these social categories. If you're working with a task force for your organization and they say, okay, we're going to have the Slack channel set up for all of you, you go in and the first thing that you see is other people in my organization. It's hard to not see them based on that social category first, within a little bit of identifying information just to tell them apart. But this is a really tough challenge, and something that we're still really trying to address as scholars is how do we, especially those zero history interactions, the first time I meet you, make sense of you when so much of what's online is both highly identifying and yet also highly queued up to these social categories. It's a tough tension. So again, the context of the interaction can do a lot to sort of guide us into these group perceptions, and the type of group that you're in may help as well. Now, broadly, we can talk about two different types of groups, and this isn't online groups only. This works for offline groups as well. We're just going to pull them into the online context here in a minute. Broadly, groups have been categorized as either common bond groups or common identity groups. Let's talk about the former. In common bond groups, the connection that you have with the group is really about the interpersonal connections among members. You're a member of this group because you like the people in it. And it may not matter as much what they talk about or the groupiness amongst them, but rather it's those personal relationships that really connect you to the group and other members to the group as well. Online, we see a lot of examples of common bond groups. Pick your favorite social medium, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, and these are typically very strong common bond groups. So what you see here is a network map, and if we mapped out a lot of your social networks, you'd see things like this. And within this network map, everyone's connected to you, but then we can also map out who that you follow or are friends with is connected with each other. And you start to see these clusters, these sort of dense groups where certain members and certain clusters are really tightly connected with each other. And what you're seeing is subgroups in your social network. So that really dense cluster at the top of this circle may be, for example, your high school or college friends. The cluster just to the left of it, slightly less dense, that may be the high school friends. And some of them know your college friends, but there's not a lot of overlap between them. The bottom left, we see a pretty dense group, but that doesn't really talk to other people in your social network. That may be your work group, because the people you work with are not necessarily your friends, and so they don't know your drinking buddies or softball buddies. The sort of core group at the center, that yellow group, may be family members, because your family members know some of your college friends and high school friends, but aren't terribly close with them, but they are close with each other. And so the reason that we're on a lot of our social media channels is because they allow us to connect with the people that we like. And in fact, if you think about some of the migrations you may have made during your lifetime from one social medium to another, it likely is because you were following your social groups. We've seen younger users sort of move away from Facebook as sort of a daily social medium into other things like TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram, in large part because that's where the people they want to talk with have migrated to. As a grandma or your priest or rabbi or imam jump onto Facebook, that's no longer like the place for friends, and so you stay on Facebook to retain connection with those people, but you migrate to Instagram because that's where all your friends are, or even going from Instagram to a Rinsta account or a Finsta account, because that's a reflection of where your relationships are, these common bond groups. We see other forms of this as well, though, and so think about like online fantasy leagues. So this is obviously it's a face-to-face meeting, usually for a draft day. But we see a lot of friends do things like either sort of collective watching of things like the Oscars or sports events, or fantasy football and fantasy basketball and other sports leagues where, yeah, we come together to talk about football, but really it's just a mechanism that people that we already like can hang out together, maybe with this shared interest of an excuse. And once the football season ends, they join another fantasy league just to keep it going. Again, not that they care about the sport that much. They may be fanatical or not, but it's really about spending time with our friends. Ultimately, we have common identity groups. These are groups where members are brought together and primarily relate based on their shared interest or social category. They're not going to have necessarily a really strong tie with a whole bunch of other group members. They may have a friend that brought them into this group, or friendship certainly can develop. But for the most part, they're in this group because this group shares the same social category as they do. So some of these common identity groups include things like raid groups. So we see a lot of online multiplayer games from World of Warcraft to EverQuest, where we have large groups of people that come together in these very tightly structured task groups. So every Tuesday night you get together to run this really complex end game dungeon that requires 25 or 40 people to play, and you've got to be really organized and collaborate together and build on each other's skills and shore up each other's shortcomings. But at the end of the day, it's not, and some raid groups are definitely friends that have found a video game to play, but some of these raid groups come together and they're just a member of this raid group, and as members come and go, the members that stay aren't there because they particularly like Brad 24601 or Dragon Slayer. They like that raiding guild or that game, and so it's that group, that common identity that's brought them together more than necessarily the relational connections with other group members. We see a lot of online support groups and online identity groups this way. So if you were, for example, in a very small conservative town, but working through LGBTQ identities, oftentimes we'll see people will go online looking to find groups that have that same social category, especially if that social category is sort of deficient or underrepresented face to face. And again, we may go online and look for friends that are in that group, but the primary thing that brings us to that group is the shared social category, where we either identify as LGBTQ or we're thinking about and trying to understand if we do. And so we go online looking for others to help us sort of make sense of that and ourselves. And then lastly, a lot of work and organizational groups are this common identity group. Now, you may have coworkers that you like and some that you're even friends with, but for the most part, when you're on a work team and you're on a work call, the real thing that binds you together is the virtue that you're all employed by the same organization or a member of the same group. And suddenly, if one member leaves, you don't just pick up and leave. You have to be part of that group as a new member is slotted in to replace them, because it's a common identity group. You are all there by virtue of being a member of the Pegasus organization or whatever your organization is. So this gives us a little bit of understanding and framework to understand how groups, particularly online, can manifest and function and therefore kind of hold themselves together. So how do we come together, though? Broadly, there's two ways to think of this. We can come together as a group to function and collaborate with others either very deliberately or very ad hoc, in other words, sort of unknowingly. When we come together deliberately, we're often going to seek out and then join. And the joining here may be very formal, such as filling out a membership form or going to join a job site, or it may be just simply asking to be invited into a group or getting invited into a group. But we've made some sort of deliberate choice, and you've said part of your social identity or sort of your groupiness is going to be being a member of this group. And so the group on our screen here is an Instagram group, Morning Walk Crew. And so you want to get up and take a walk with some folks in your neighborhood, so you decide to join this group. Now, this may be a common identity group. It may be people that really like walking. It may be a common bond group where it's everybody who likes hanging out together, and the morning is the best time they can do that, and so we may as well walk. But either way, you've still said, hey, I want to find a time to either do this thing or be with these people, and so you've sought out and joined this group. Again, a lot of work in organizations and groups, sort of formal groups, are these much more deliberately structured, I want to be in this group. Interesting thing about being online, though, is there are times we may be in a group and not even know it. These are the ad hoc groups, the ones that sort of naturally emerge, and you may not even be a member. And so what you see on the screen right now is a network graph of just naturally occurring discussions about COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that the network analysis program did, it's a system called NodeXL, is it clustered groups of people who frequently interacted with each other. This is either responding to tweets or sending directed tweets at someone. And the COVID-19 discussions online, like many discussions, are huge. And yet, if you start plotting out who talks with whom, and this is not necessarily talking in the sense of agreeing, these may be very debated topics, but the fact that we interact, we can start seeing clusters naturally emerge. And in fact, one of the things that tools like NodeXL is they give us these clusters so we can start seeing what is it that these people are talking about together. And I don't actually know what these groups are. It's just an example I found online, one of which may be talking about sort of medical journals and peer-reviewed studies talking about COVID-19. Another group may be COVID denialists. Another group may be doctors or those members of the CDC. Still another group talking about social implications, and another group strategies during lockdown during COVID-19. Now, no one woke up in the morning. Well, I shouldn't say that. Few people probably woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to log onto Twitter and join a formal group. And in fact, there's no formal groups here. What these groups are naturally emerging clusters of people that talk with each other. And so in the textbook, one of the things that I reference is a study done by Zapinga, one of my favorite studies looking at coffee discussions online. And exactly the same thing happened. Groups naturally emerged. And the people that are true coffee aficionados and looking for the best beans and roasting patterns and grinding and pressing and the sort of purists naturally start talking to each other, because they're not going to talk with people that also like coffee, but it's just I need my cup of Java in the morning to start my day. And still different are those that may think sort of the elitists of coffees, I need my single source, French pressed, hoity-toity, snooty coffee. And that's going to be different still from those that just sort of need coffee throughout the day, the coffee addicts, and the quality doesn't matter, and it's not necessarily even ritualistic, we just need a lot of it. That study really nicely presents these naturally emerging groups that naturally occur in complex, huge scale discussions online, where members don't even know that they're part of a group. When you start looking at their interaction patterns, we very quickly start to realize these groups have naturally emerged, and people are innately, without deliberately thinking about it, talking, whether it's about the politics of COVID or about the proper steeping techniques for one's slow roast coffee. The other thing we need to worry about a little bit when we talk about online collaboration is the structure of our groups themselves, the way we actually configure them. To do this, we kind of need to go back and revisit side. And side is this idea of when our individual identities are suppressed, the thing that fills in the place of that identification is our groupiness. And so we see things like two groups that may be polar opposite because one sees a rabbit and the other sees a duck, and so they become naturally oppositional. When we talk about groups online, even singular groups, we've got to be very mindful of the lessons that we learned from side. If we put together two different groups online, Red Sox fans and Yankees fans, West Coast rap, East Coast rap, Democrats and Republicans, of course there's going to be conflict. But what happens when you're in a task force for your organization? What happens when you're in a volunteering group trying to put together a community event? The lessons of side still need to be sort of attended to here. One of which is because CMC allows us to geographically and temporally unbound ourselves. We don't all have to be in the same meeting room. A lot of our CMC groups are online by virtue of we're not all near each other, especially as more organizations and nonprofit groups become sort of transnational, if not multinational. Everybody on the Zoom call may not be in the same geographic location. And actually what we find is your offline presence can create these natural clusters within the larger group and create within group subgroup dynamics. And so the people from the Connecticut office and the Florida office and the Illinois office, we don't have to make a big deal out of it, because these are the people that after the Zoom call can talk with each other if they're in the office, or are going to bump into each other at the grocery store, or just identify as fellow Illini or Floridians or Connecticutians, whatever the demonym for that is. Subgroups are naturally going to form, and we've seen this with some empirical studies of your offline configurations can matter. And so this is not to say when you're setting up groups, don't have two people from the same geographic area in there. Rather, first of all, be mindful of it. And then if you're leading the group or managing the group or just giving them suggestions, being aware of that to sort of account for that and mitigate those offline subgroupings that can sometimes break off subcategories is really important to do. The other challenge that we can have is, especially as we have more online visual representation of ourselves, this could be of an avatar, whether that's an icon that's next to our name when we type in something into the chat box, or if we're in a chat room, there's a physical representation of ourselves, and especially as we move into virtual reality and mediated spaces, as we're embodied and having a body to move around and interact in this virtual space. Online representations can have similar impacts to these offline geographic representations. In other words, if you've got, for example, a chat with online chat with 4 people in a group using the 4 avatars on your screen, there are two pairs of avatars. Even if it's four unique individuals operating them, there are really just two avatars. And what we find is the two at the top, the sort of woman wearing a blue blouse and looks like rolled up jeans, those two will naturally start to sort of converge. And they're not having these nefarious, let's take on striped shirt avatars. It just naturally happens that we've given them something to allow them to find this shared identity, and they will start doing things like agreeing with each other more, disagreeing more with the striped shirt avatars, just because of this sort of presumed us that can come into this conversation. And so what we can do there is just give everyone a different avatar, whether this is your picture or if you're trying to reduce some of those potential effects of physical cues or identity cues, just having different avatars, whether they're cartoons or caricatures or sort of faceless images like you see on the screen. So long as everyone has their own, it allows us to not then fall into that. It doesn't give us something to rally around, behind. It doesn't give us some minimalistic group identity to form up around and create within group, intergroup challenges. Alternately, give everyone the same avatar. Use the organization logo, use the whatever drawing you've done for your group, and give everyone the same one. And now we can't have these different groups sort of polarizing because everyone just looks the same. But ultimately, how we configure our groups, whether it's the offline sort of geography of our group membership or the online ways that we're represented and presented, can have really interesting and sort of complex effects on how we interact. One of the other things we increasingly use groups for online is social support. Now, this is something we could absolutely talk about in the interpersonal chapter and talk about with respect to health, but let's talk about it briefly with respect to groups, because a lot of the online groups that we go to that aren't necessarily organizational in nature are there for social support. Now, broadly, social support is communication that increases the perception that you have control over your life, your circumstances, by virtue of reducing uncertainty, by giving you some surety or confidence about who you are or what's coming, or reducing uncertainty about the past, present, or future. That gives you a sense of control and stability in your life. Now, there's been a bunch of typologies about social support. Depending on who you read and how it's understood, social support can manifest in anything from 1 to about 48 different ways. What we're going to use is one of the most common typologies of social support, which really says there are 4 primary dimensions of social support, or forms of social support that we can provide. And so I want to take a moment and talk about those and then how they manifest online. So the first type of support is emotional support. When we talk about social support, this is probably the type of support that we usually mean, or at least think of first. And social support is, emotional support is the ability to provide some sort of emotion, whether it's sympathy or compassion or understanding, to someone else. So oftentimes if we're having a bad day, we may jump online and to our social media and say, hey, I just didn't do well on my test, or significant other broke up with me, or I just kind of feeling down today. And what we're looking for is other people to come and either tell us it's going to be okay, in the sense of sort of that giving us control or surety over our life, that it will be better later on, or just telling us it's okay to be sad and sort of feel those emotions. Both of those become forms of emotional support. Another kind of support that we can look for and find online is esteem support. And esteem support is that support where you're looking for some sort of validation about you, and feeling like you're good enough and you're doing well enough. One of the, I think, common ones that I've come across with esteem support on is fit checks. You get up in the morning, you get yourself dressed, ready to go, you snap a picture of your outfit, that's fit, to your social medium, and then you go about sort of the rest of your getting ready steps. You have breakfast, brush teeth, check email, whatever. And then right before you walk out the door, you check up on your Instagram. And did particularly key figures say, yeah, your outfit is good today? And they could have taken the time to deliberately type that in, great fit. Or more often they'll use paralinguistic digital affordances, those one-click cues like a thumbs up, or a like, or a heart, or a favorite, or whatever your social medium terms it as. And so you jump onto your post and you see, oh, these people have told me this is a good fit. And sometimes you're just looking for quantity. 15 people like this outfit. It must be good because it met my benchmark. Even more often, we're looking for specific network figures to give us that esteem support. It doesn't matter what everybody thinks, but it matters about the person that I view as sort of a fashionista or a outfit opinion leader. And if they've liked it, that's a sign that my outfit is good, that I've done a good job putting this together, and I'm ready to go. If you don't get the support that you need, now rather than risk going out in the outfit you know is bad, you run back into the closet quick, change outfits, try it again, and go out in your day in that one. Third type of support we talk about online, and happens online is informational support. There's lots of places we go for informational support. Certainly online support groups for things like cancer and other illnesses. Sometimes we go there for emotional support. I have no idea the devastation wrought on individuals diagnosed with cancer or their families, but certainly if you have been or a family member has been diagnosed with cancer, some of the things you just need is understanding. And in fact, there's a lot of cancer patient support groups where they sort of explicitly say, family members, doctors, oncologists, you're not welcome here because you have no way of emotionally understanding what we're going through. There's absolutely no way to empathize with this, and this is a place for that emotional support where when someone says, I feel you, they understand, the person getting that support understands they actually do share that emotion. Other times, though, we just need information. Everything from who's a good doctor in my area to if you're post-cancer, information about how often should I be going in on checkups or how do I deal with insurance. There's a lot of times we look for informational support online, especially in the workplace. One of the biggest things we look for is information, either specific information that you need to know, what were our earnings last third quarter, or more often, information about who knows the information. Who would I go to find out what last year's third quarter earnings were? And using, for example, an enterprise social medium to look up who in our organization has that information. Lastly is instrumental support. Instrumental support is usually some sort of tangible, physical, fungible good or service. Now, in the early days of the internet, researchers really had problems thinking about instrumental support because, for example, it's really hard to help someone move a couch through the internet. Just something TCP/IP protocols haven't been set up to do. And so early theorizing about instrumental social support online just kind of said it couldn't happen. And yet increasingly we've seen instrumental support find ways to manifest online. Now this could be as simple as getting your friends to donate you $20. You could put out a call for instrumental support on Instagram or TikTok. Hey, I need $20 for gas this week. Can someone lend it to me? But also we see, this is a case of a guy at college game day, was showing up to a football game one morning. Busch Light supply needs replenishment, Venmo me, and Carson King, here's his Venmo address, and proceeded to first get money for Busch Light, and then additionally raised $1 million for cancer research. That's very much instrumental support facilitated by the CMC tool of Venmo. Just you need money, here it is. But additionally, even back to the moving a couch example with things like TaskRabbit or Gopher, if my friend in California needs to move and I can't physically go there to help them move, I can use CMC tools to help rent them a moving service help or rent them a moving van and provide instrumental support that way. And it may not be the instrumental support they initially intended it to be, but it does get the couch moved. So what's the end result of all this? We've found the people in our neighborhood, we've started working with them. Neighborhood here is obviously very proverbial. What does working with other people online do? Well, first of all, there's a huge social dynamic to this. Probably one of the places this is most evident is gaming. We talked earlier about gaming groups, things like raid and raiding guilds being very task-oriented, and yet it's also incredibly social. Whether you're playing MMO like Warcraft or Helldivers 2 and playing with other people, or NBA Jam, or whatever the game is, gaming is a very social thing. Multiplayer gaming is a very, very social thing. And it's a way for a lot of people to find a means to interact with other people that they know and just keep that relationship going. And so sometimes playing a cooperative mission or even playing against each other is just a means of being social. It can also help us get tasks done. And again, whether it's a nonprofit organization or a for-profit organization or just a volunteer group trying to do something better for the community, the ability to go online, and whether through Slack channels or Discord servers or going into virtual reality spaces like Meta, the ability to go and sort of replicate the offline environment, or at least find ways to collaborate and coordinate and co-reference. This is one of the reasons virtual reality has a lot of promise for us, is we can stand virtually stand in front of this virtual scheduling board or Gantt chart and point at things and point at a particular part of the screen. And the thing that I point at, you can see. Versus here in this interaction, when I point at something, you may not know what I'm pointing at because you can't see off my screen. So VR spaces will give us this ability to co-referent, to share the same point of reference. But for all these reasons, it allows us task coordination and collaboration, bringing groups of people together, again, whether it's through Slack or just shared calendars to schedule and work together. And then, of course, organizational communication. Williams and Tapscott's Wikinomics has an example of the Boeing 787. Something like 80% of it was not made by Boeing. It was outsourced to other providers. And so one organization in Indonesia was responsible for building the flaps. Another organization in Egypt, the ailerons. Another one in Saudi Arabia was responsible for doing the kitchen galley. All this came together, and really the only thing that Boeing did primarily was the navigational systems and radar, which is really their sort of proprietary bread and butter, and then coordinating everybody else. So we see a lot of organizations, especially as more organizations are online or more organizations are distributed and more organizations look to CMC tools to help members coordinate, whether it's across time and space or just because the organization itself is really, really distributed and needs CMC tools to help group members come together and coordinate. So whether this is putting together the neighborhood picnic or putting together a flying tube that flies us transatlantically, online collaboration helps us get a lot of stuff done. So just because we're done with the chapter, don't stop thinking about this. A couple questions to sort of keep you going. First of all, how does the permeability of an online group affect its membership? Some groups are really easy to get into. You just, for example, some of the Twitter discussions, you just start talking. Other ones are really hard, either membership or joining an organization or having to ask someone in the group, please let me join the group or the Instagram chat group or whatever. How does that affect its membership? Why would we want to collaborate online rather than offline? And I don't want you to think this is just a simple answer, because we're far apart. Well, what's the benefit of doing online rather than bringing people here? Why not have a central office? Once you answer that, think about how do those configurations of where we are offline affect our online groups, particularly as more groups are geographically disparate. Think about maybe some of the online classes you've had, or for those of you that work with larger organizations, you've had to have a conference call with different either parts of your region or parts of your district. Where the people are physically affect the nature of the online interactions. Lastly, think about the types of people you've interacted with online in groups. What affects the degree to which you see them as these idiosyncratic, unique, personalized individuals versus to what degree you see them as members of the group or having the social identity either of the group or something else instead. With that, scholars, we have reached the end. Thank you so much for sticking with us, and look forward to seeing you next time.